Now, to get around this prejudice, Rawls proposed what he called the original position, and argued that a just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you'd be willing to enter it in a random place. He reasoned that if people determined the basic structure of society behind a veil of ignorance, which would deprive them of information about their specific characteristics such as their ethnicity, social status, and gender, they would create a welfare state. They'd elect a society that maximizes the prospects of the worst off, because they themselves might be the worst off. They'd create a society that would ensure that if they or their loved ones were born blind, deaf, or dumb, they'd nevertheless have a life worth living. Thus, this is the primary reason I'm not a libertarian. Despite the fact that I came from a broken family and had a very rough upbringing, I am extremely lucky to have the characteristics that I do.
Okay, let's pause. Goddamn right, you're lucky. All right, I'm sorry. I'm very attracted to this man.
Nothing for me.
That doesn't do it for Rob. Okay, look, there are so many problems with this veil of ignorance thing that it's hard for me to even know where to begin. But I would just start by pointing out that none of this is addressing the libertarian moral dynamic of whether it's wrong to initiate violence against a peaceful person. This is not even getting into it. But if you want to go down this Rawls thing, there's so many problems with it, so many fundamental flaws. So number one, Rawls says that in order to judge a society, the morality of a society, people need to put themselves behind a veil of ignorance. And then in this veil of ignorance where you have no idea what you're going to be, you don't know if you're going to be handicapped, crippled, or have all your functions. You don't know if you're going to be black or white, male or female, any of these things. And then you have to judge what type of a society you'd want from this veil of ignorance. Now, the number one obvious problem with this is that that's not reality. That's not how human beings exist. We don't come into the world through a veil of ignorance. Man is born into the world naked, and then he has to mix natural goods with his own labor to produce economic goods. That's reality. That whether you like it or not, whether you think we should start from this veil of ignorance, we don't. So it's just a pure thought experiment that is not borne out in reality at all. And then he just asserts that in this veil of ignorance, we will feel this way. Well, how do you know? How do you know how people would feel in a veil? Basically, his assertion is that people wouldn't want to gamble. If you're behind this veil of ignorance, people wouldn't want to gamble that maybe I'll end up a fucking cripple who can't work, and there's no welfare state there for me. So I wouldn't want to gamble. Well, what about human behavior tells you that people don't want to gamble? I mean, we just started off our podcast talking about casinos. I'm guessing it wasn't empty. I'm guessing there were a few people there. People seem to like to gamble. How's the state lotto doing? Seems to be doing pretty well. People like to roll the dice. Roll the dice and risk everything. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's how people would feel. Maybe not. Then there's this whole other question, which you alluded to earlier, that doesn't even seem to be covered, is that does the welfare state actually make people better off or not? Is it better to have a monopoly on violence that enforces, or a monopoly on the initiation of violence that forces you to give more money to who they deem as less fortunate, and also in every practical, real example, also gives a whole lot of money in like corporate welfare and things like that to people who don't need it at all? Is that a better system to actually guarantee that the less advantaged are taken care of or not? Isn't there an onus on you to demonstrate this if you're going to say that people behind a veil of ignorance would want this? Also, who really cares what people want? People have wanted really bad things throughout life. But the most damning point to me of all of it, and this is, it's like a reductio ad absurdum, but it's also just kind of showing the hole in this logic. If you really wanted that, well, what you'd need is not redistribution on a national scale, because maybe I say people should hang out behind a veil of ignorance on a global scale. You might be born in Central Africa, or you might be born in North America, or you know what I mean? So, okay, you might be born in some rich town in San Francisco, or you might be born in Central Africa. So really what we'd need then, by this own logic, is to redistribute everything out of the first world into the third world, right? And bring everybody's standard of living way, way, way down. Now, of course, what falls apart with this is that you realize, and this is true on a national level too, but look, we've spent more money on welfare than the socialists of 1870 could have ever fathomed would exist in the world. They couldn't have imagined the wealth that we've redistributed could have ever existed back then, right? I mean, we've spent trillions and trillions of dollars and still have all of these problems of inequality and all these other things. So there's no real evidence that this is actually going to lift people up. In fact, you might just be incentivizing really bad behavior all over the place and taking away from the productive and giving to people who are less productive. May not be the best way to help. Charity, helping people out, is a very complicated, nuanced issue. And people know this just from your life, right? Like just from real life. Like, you know, there are people, say parents, who help out children, right? Who like help their kids out. And then I bet you know some parents who really enable their kids, right? By like kind of like taking care of them too long. Maybe their kid's a drug addict and they keep giving them money. And you're like, yeah, that's got, you really got to know the person, know how to help them, know what the situation is. To just say everybody who's not making money gets this check. This is a very inefficient model that often creates bad results. But the truth is, what we'd need to do if we applied the veil of ignorance Rawlsian philosophy on a global scale is just impoverish all of the wealthy nations in the world. Say, we're all going to basically, we'll tick the standard of living of a Central African up, you know, for whatever it is, like 1 billion people in the world or something who make like $1.50 a day, live on that level of life. They can all go up to like $3 a day, and we'll all come down to $3 a day. You know, I'm not, these aren't exact numbers, but it's going to end up with us being dirt poor, and throw money at them, and it may not even fix the situation. So is anybody in a first world country willing to give up everything for something that may not even work? Man, there's so many problems with this veil of ignorance like idea. One, it's not real. It doesn't exist in reality. It's just an assertion that people would want to do this from the veil of ignorance. We don't know, because no one exists in this veil of ignorance. We don't know what people would decide. We have no way, and it's fairly difficult for one person to just say, because they decided, if everybody was in this random scenario that I just invented, they'd feel this way. Let me tell you something. There's a lot of you could have someone you know very well, one of your closest friends, and say, in this scenario, they'd do X and be wrong very easily. So to just say for billions of people who you don't know, this is how they would feel in this crazy hypothetical, which could never exist in reality, that's quite a stretch. And then, of course, the major flaw in it, or I mean, there's a lot of flaws, but another major flaw is just that you're not even demonstrating that the welfare state actually helps. And I would argue that it doesn't. So how do you know? Maybe they, even by the same, like you could, and I don't subscribe to this at all, but you could, by the same Rawlsian logic, you could accept the veil of ignorance, accept that everyone would want a society where, you know, like there's safeguards and where people are at the bottom are doing better, and still argue for a free market. Because you'd say a free market is what's going to lead to the greatest increase in wealth around around the society. I mean, look, like there are homeless people in America who live at a higher standard of living than average people in third world countries. I mean, there's certainly poor people in America live at a much higher standard of living than average people in third world countries. So the truth is, you'd want to figure out what creates wealth as a society, and that is free markets. So I just think I don't even know where to start. The Rawls thing is just so flawed, and he's saying this is his primary reason against libertarianism. But again, just to use the analogy we used before, if you were to say, let's say you're a dude who really wants to find a hot wife, would you rather live in a society where there's voluntary relationships and hot chicks get their pick of men because all these men want them and they get to pick? Or would you rather live in a society where dudes get to rape a hot chick once a week? You get a different hot chick that you get to rape. Maybe a lot of dudes would pick the society where they can rape chicks because that would be more equal. And I know Rob Bernstein would. The point is, that doesn't matter. It doesn't address the libertarian moral claim of whether that's wrong. So you're just not even addressing the libertarian. To me, what is the fundamental point? There's two major points to libertarianism. One is the moral argument, which I always lead with because that's the reason I'm a libertarian. But the other one is the efficiency argument of free markets and that it creates more wealth. So you're not really dealing with either. That's the truth. You're not dealing with either. You're brushing aside the libertarian moral claim, not even addressing that, and then taking it as a given that poor people are better off in a welfare state. Well, I don't agree with that. I don't think they are at all. I mean, just obviously there's endless examples of this that we could use, but so you'd say, well, you want a system where education is covered by the state. Well, okay. I mean, I don't know. I could think of an example of that. The society we live in right now. How's that doing? How are public schools doing for the poorest amongst us? They're goddamn nightmares. They're graduating. The percentage is like as hugely illiterate. It's a goddamn nightmare, and they spend a ton of money on them. Here in New York City, they spend $20,000 per student per year. It's an unbelievable amount of tax resources that are being used. Is there any evidence to show that this is really helping them? So you haven't established that at all either. So you're not dealing with the moral claim, and you're just taking that as a given that the efficiency argument is not true. So I haven't really heard any argument against libertarianism yet. All right, let's keep going.
While I've worked extremely hard to get where I am, I did not earn the temperament, patience, charisma, and, if you will, intellect that I have. I was simply dealt good biological cards. Thus, I'm convinced that some of the fruit of my labour should go to those less fortunate, and that the same is true of Walter's fruit.
You can pause for one
Now,
second.
Sam Harris.
And none of us would ever tell you that you shouldn't share it.
Right. Because this is the point that this isn't the libertarian position.
Yeah.
Like, again, back to the analogy of the hot chick. Sorry to harp on this. No, but the libertarian position isn't maybe she should give a guy who's not as good looking a shot. Maybe she should go on a date with that guy. Yeah, maybe she should. That's not what we're arguing. We're arguing you can't rape her. Yeah. That's immoral. So yes, maybe people should share their wealth. In fact, lots of people do. And good for you. As a society, we tend to say, hey, good job to people who give to charity. Like we give them awards dinners and, like you try to kind of like say, hey, thanks for doing that. One of the major reasons, I mean, part of it is for tax shelters and things like that, but one of the major reasons why rich people give a lot to charity is to get the kudos. You kind of look like a really good guy. Some of them genuinely care. It's hard to separate these things from self-interest. Now, to the point that he's making about how he's like, look, I had a lot of, advantages in life. Like I'm a charismatic guy. I'm intelligent. And which he does seem to be, all of those things. Okay, fine. But, there's also other people who are charismatic and intelligent who don't make anything of themselves. So while it's true that you can't take all of the credit, you also can't remove that. It's not as if none of that is earned. So let's not play. And what do you think, like, to not focus on that part of it is a lot more destructive, because there are a lot of people who, under really difficult circumstances, still make something of themselves. And shouldn't they be given some credit for that? Isn't it better to feel a little bit of ownership over what you did earn? Right? I mean, then you can think of a ton of examples of things like that. But, yeah. All right, let's keep on.
In a post titled How to Lose Readers Without Even Trying, which admittedly makes me a little nervous about my releasing this video, put Rawls' original position this way. Many of my critics pretend they have been entirely self-made. They seem to feel responsible for their intellectual gifts, for their freedom from injury and disease, and for the fact that they were born at a specific moment in history. Many appear to have absolutely no awareness of how lucky one must be to succeed at anything in life, no matter how hard one works. One must be lucky to be able to work. One must be lucky to be intelligent, to not have cerebral palsy, or to not have been bankrupt in middle age by the mortal illness of a spouse. Many of us have been extraordinarily lucky, and we did not earn it. Many good people have been extraordinarily unlucky, and they did not deserve it. And yet, I get the distinct sense that if I asked some of my readers why they were not born with club feet or orphaned before the age of 5, they would not hesitate to take credit for these accomplishments. Anyhow,
right, let's pause it right there. It's when you say I get the distinct sense that they would say that they would say they take credit for not being born with club feet. Did anyone ever actually say that? Because that's insane. Or are you just saying you get the sense that they would say that? Well, no, of course, no one. I've never heard of anybody saying that, and I think that would be insane to deny. Of course, there's a lot of luck involved. However, on the same token, it would be equally crazy to deny altogether that nothing is earned, and that there aren't some people in very bad situations who fucking work really hard and do things like that and earn it. Now, Rawls would say work ethic is luck too. It's all luck. You're lucky to have a good work ethic. So I think that part is just crazy. It's like, no, there are different people. There are forks in the road, and people choose which one to go down. And so, yes, it's crazy to say we earn everything. It's also crazy to say we earn nothing.
Also, I think some of what they might critique about people having or creating wealth is actually not luck, but really just desire. People have different preferences in life. Some people aren't going for wealth. Some people aren't, like, that's just not what they're looking for. So, you know what I mean? It's like some people, they're accomplishing these things because they have the desire to go accomplish it. Some people don't feel the desire to be accomplished in life. They're pretty content playing video games. God bless them. I don't give a shit. But, you know, it's like, so to take this model of, well, the only reason that some people were successful is because, like, no, a lot of it just has to do with the fact they wanted it. Like, and that's, so they went out and they got it. Like, it's got nothing, you know what I mean?
And, you know, and yes, you're completely right. And then beyond that, there's a lot of people, because it's not just that we're such simple creatures that we either want something or want something else. A lot of people want a lot of things, and it's where they rank. Yeah. So the person who just sits on their ass and smokes weed and plays video games, he may want $1 million too. And the guy who makes $1 million may want to sit on his ass and smoke weed and play video games. But he wanted the $1 million a lot more, and that guy wanted to be lazy a lot more. So when things are said and done, this guy goes and grinds and works his ass off, and he makes the $1 million, and this guy was sitting on his ass the whole time. And now this guy's like, well, I want part of your money that you just earned. And it's like, yeah, but I didn't get to sit on my ass and smoke weed and play video games. So I sacrificed that for this. You sacrificed this for that. It never struck me as particularly fair to say that you get to, it's not like that guy gets to come tax some of your fun and have some of that back. He doesn't get 20% of your fun. Why do you get 20% of his money? And, you know, it's like, you can use the example of some poor child who's like starving. I happen to believe that society, you can find enough good people who are willing to voluntarily help people in that situation. And by the way, if you can't, if you're saying people are just so evil that they'll just let that kid starve and you can't voluntarily figure that out, you also have a big problem with your statist model, because you're relying on people to be the politicians. Now, these same evil people are supposed to be granted the power of the state and then do the right thing. So there's a real problem there. And then, of course, you all want democracy. So these same evil people are supposed to vote in the politicians who will then enact these good policies. But we're all still people. We're all still these evil people, right? Like, so there's a real problem in your model as well, if people are so evil and selfish. But I just don't actually believe that that's the case.
You know what these guys should really do? They're very into pooling risk, so they should sell insurance. And they should invent new insurance policies. You can do an insurance policy where you go to parents before their kids are born. Hey, I know you're about to have a kid that's born.
You want to insure against them being disabled, insure against them being hungry.
That kid might be a real dumb piece of shit.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create an insurance pool of everyone that's interested in this. They're of a similar social economic background to you right now. And there's, you know, if your kid turns out to be a drug addict at age 30, we're going to take some of the money that everyone's been paying into over the years and he'll be provided for.
But that is your insurance.
Insurance
is the free market answer to mitigating risk.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And insurance is actually, I mean, right now we have this kind of statist, you know, interventionist clusterfuck of an insurance industry. But if you actually look at what insurance is, it is kind of a beautiful thing. I know statists never give any credit to market phenomenon, but if you think about what insurance really is, like in the free market, what health insurance is, it's a bunch of healthy people paying for sick people's medical bills. Like, factually, that is how it works. Like, that's what is going on. Now, everyone's paying in because they might be that sick person at some point, but it's a bunch of healthy people agreeing to pool their resources to cover that person who gets sick. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I actually think that's quite reasonable. Yeah, if you're so worried about risk, well, here's a tool to mitigate risk. You can insure against it. Okay. All right, let's keep playing the video.
Moving on, the second reason I'm not a libertarian is because I don't believe in natural rights, which I would argue is the very bedrock of libertarianism. If it wasn't, then all of morality would come down to arbitrary private contracts, and libertarians certainly don't believe that this is the case. They hold that we are born with certain inalienable rights, namely life, liberty, and, in most cases, property. But I see absolutely no justification for this. Many libertarians, such as John Locke, insist that these rights are God-given, that we have the right to liberty because God said so. But I, as an atheist, obviously don't find this convincing. And what's more, even if I was a Christian like Locke, I'd still reject his assertion,
Quick
as in
pause
my
for a sec.
opinion, the Bible
Sure.
explicitly...
Yeah, so I think he's actually, I think this is a really interesting point, and I think he's somewhat right that I get it. Here's his problem though. So let's say we say, you're right, there are no natural rights. You're right. You're not born in with any guarantees. There's nothing that like, even your right to private property is not a natural right. Fine. But now if we're going to look at it and go, all right, well, what would be fair? What would make sense for everybody before they start off here? What can we agree upon that's going to protect everybody and allow them to live a better life? Well, it's going to be we're not going to violate. It's the non-aggression principle.
Right.
So in other words, we agree with you. There is no natural right. So what can we do so that human beings can get along and all live, with prosperity? Oh, we'll institute a non-aggression principle because I think if we have that, that's going to be the best system for everybody.
Yeah.
So it's not
I
a
agree
natural
with you.
right argument.
Well, I agree with you. To me, it comes down to my take, at least, on natural rights. And it's true that, there have been people like John Locke who spoke about it in a way that I wouldn't agree with, although he contributed a lot to, he was a brilliant philosopher. But to me, it's as simple as the way I look at natural rights is it's an ought, not an is. Okay, so I'm not saying you have natural rights, not like this is a thing. Like you're born with this right we're saying you ought to have these rights. Like look, if you believe in morality at all, if you're rejecting morality, that's a different conversation to have.
Yeah.
In which case, I'm not quite sure why you care that the fucking sick kid doesn't get taken care of. If you're just saying there's no such thing as right and wrong, then it's like, well, go get yours. Why are you trying to convince people to live in this system that you're claiming is more moral? But if you accept morality at all, then it's kind of like, oh, well, then you're saying what people ought to do, what you think is right and what you think is wrong. And I'm saying that I think it's right to what are that it is morally right to grant people natural rights. I mean, what is a right? A right is an action that you can take that it would be immoral to interfere with. That you, in the same way, you have a right to go buy an apple from the supermarket. You have a right. We could never list all the rights that you have. It's anything that you can take, an action that isn't immoral, that would be immoral for somebody else to come interfere with. So yeah, I'm not saying in the same sense. It's like if a woman is raped or a woman is stabbed, a baby is murdered. If you're granting me these things are wrong, so okay, you're not saying that they're born into the world or that God gave them the right to not be stabbed or not be raped, but you're saying we ought to not rape them. We ought to not stab them. That's a bad thing to do.
Somewhat stated differently, in a universe or, in a dimension where there is no natural rights, what would you rather? Forced pooling of risk or a non-aggression principle? And you and I will say, well, the non-aggression principle is the more moral of the two. And if you do a real analysis of the forced pooling of risks, you're going to end up with prosperity being robbed from people. That's the real outcome there.
Yes, the real outcome. And evil.